Hello, and welcome to Curious Conversations. We are your hosts, Carly and Mandy. And this week, we are talking about the original Central State Hospital. Mandy, were you familiar with this hospital before all of this?
Yes. So I looked like that was a great thing. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just a very interesting thing. It's not a great thing at all, but it's interesting. I've actually known of a few people back in the day who were there.
Okay. So you're going to have some inside info for us.
A little bit at least. Yeah. Yep.
All right. Yeah. Well, I visited there pretty recently, so I can't wait to talk about it. But first, let's jump in with our curious dish. So,
Let's do
this is
it.
part of our show where we dish about the most curious thing that we have seen this week. Mandy, what do you have?
Okay, so we just celebrated the 4th.
Yes.
And so we went to like one of the local, there's several that shoot the big fireworks and have the whole big food and music and such. We didn't want to get caught up in the crowd. So there's always like these settings outside. Everybody just, goes where you can get to watch the
Yes.
fireworks. Yeah. You know how that is. So we went to not right where we live, but we went to a place not far away. And we're trying to find one of the places we went to before. And we see people sitting up on this hill and we're like, that looks like a great view. So for some reason, even though this is a place an area I've been in a lot, I never knew that up on the hill is an old cemetery. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
so people were
So
sitting at the cemetery?
we sat at the cemetery to watch the fireworks, which so it's kind of funny
Ah,
because I look up there and this is how quick I am. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're in a cemetery. And then I'm like, hey, you want to get the blanket and get Rod over here? Before it was said and done. It's like, yeah, right here at the edge. There were a good bit of people up there, and that seems a little weird to be in a cemetery, but this cemetery was very interesting. So before it, got dark and everything, we were able to walk through, and there's like some really really old graves and some weird graves, and that's for another conversation because I saw some stuff I've never seen before, and I have a
oh,
lot of pictures. But I will say there was like Revolutionary War markers and graves and like a whole really big monument. And I was like, I don't know, it's pretty appropriate, I think, in the end.
I love it. Like, really love it. That would be so cool.
Okay, I know that I'm making it long, but this is the most curious thing about it. And I took a picture, even though my family thought I was being a weirdo. And I'm like, this is for Carly. It's for Carly. We're walking through this cemetery, and then I say, oh my gosh, it's a literal dead squirrel at a tiny little tombstone. It is the weirdest thing. Yes, yes, it's like a little tiny tombstone that no longer has like the smallest one ever, and it no longer has like the writing or anything, and there's a stiff dead squirrel like it has laid down and gave up on its side right there. It looked like it. I was like looking around, is this staged, you know is this staged? It was crazy. So yeah, I have a picture of that morbid thing. But have you ever
That's
seen anything like, is that not the weirdest thing?
that is strange, but like our kind of strange.
It's our kind of strange. Anyway, so it was a whole experience. Last
I
night was
love it.
different. Yeah. Yeah. What do you have? Do you have dead squirrels and such?
I don't have dead squirrels. No, I do not. But I have something that I saw. And you see those things and it sends you down this whole rabbit hole of, oh, I need to find out more about this. And so there's a ton of information out there. But um, there is a town in Pennsylvania. The name is Centralia, Pennsylvania. And this is a town that is on fire. The town,
Wait.
the whole town is on fire.
Now?
It is, yes, it is a ghost
Oh.
town. And it has been on fire since 1962. Tell
What?
me that's not weird. That caught my attention, and I was like, "Well, I need to know what happened there." Okay, so this town had, all of its people living there, just going about life as normal. They had trash a landfill where you would take your trash, and annually they would burn all of the trash at the landfill. Um, they did this in 1962, and it caught on fire, obviously, kind of spread out of control. But they hit an abandoned underground coal mine with this
What?
fire. Yes.
How do I not know about this? I guess I can't know
I,
every single thing, right?
I looked it up because I thought, there's no way this is real. This is not a
Yeah.
thing. I would have heard about this.
Yep.
Yep. That the fire traveled 300 feet underground.
Oh
And
my
I
gosh.
thought, and it's tunnels. I mean, you can see like a layout of the city, and there's so many tunnels under the ground, and this fire just swept through them. Um, just kind of crazy. I think in 1980, they had 1,000 residents. In 2020, they had 5 residents. So there was still a couple of people living there, with this massive burn going on. I would be so scared, be afraid something was going to blow up. But the government they did a little grant, and well, massive grant, not a little grant,
A
and
little
got all
grant.
of the residents. Yeah, just a little something. Got all of the residents moved out of there. They canceled the zip code. It's no longer has a zip code. Shut down the major highway. Yeah, isn't that
Oh my
strange?
gosh. Okay, so that's really weird. It sounds like its own episode, but you literally just told us. But I'm like, that's one of the weirdest things I've heard.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so wouldn't you like you're breathing that every day? That's not good, right? Like when there's a
Right.
fire out, in our area, I'm like, ugh, you know.
Can't breathe. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
That is
Yeah,
strange.
so it's very interesting. That would be a good starter to maybe like I don't know, a ghost town episode or something. But
Yeah.
yeah, I look it up. It's so interesting. It's fascinating and
Okay.
sad.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
Sad.
Yeah, that's weird. Oh my gosh. So that excuse me, I've got a whole thing from
Whole
being
thing.
out, side late at night. I don't know if that does that to you, but anyway, gosh, we've got a lot to talk about.
We do. There's so much to cover on this one. Um, let's start by going over some facts. How about
All
that?
right.
All right. So Central State Hospital, they accepted their first patient in 1842. And it was actually called the Georgia State Lunatic, Idiot, and Epileptic Asylum.
Yeah,
Feels
that's
wrong to
embarrassing to
say that.
say out loud, right?
Yeah.
That's a
Right.
little cringy to say the least.
Just just speaking truth.
Yep.
Um, but during its run, it was also known as the Georgia State Asylum or Sanitarium, excuse me. And then what I've known it by was Milledgeville State Hospital.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so let's talk about the first patient. Do you know about it's Tillman Barnett? Okay,
Oh,
when I had like years ago, I did a little research on this place because it's always been fascinating to me, like darkly fascinating.
sure.
And this guy comes there and he's drugged by like an ox wagon, like an ox cart.
Mm,
And that's just that vision sets it off. That's like the opening to some horror movie.
right.
So he's brought there and I don't know the intention, was it but I mean, if he's drugged by a cart, that's anyway, he didn't live long. He didn't last long there. But he was there for treatment. And, during that time they were doing things like electric shock and insulin shock, lobotomies, all that stuff, just like the ding 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 off my mind as terrifying. Some of the
Yep.
scariest things I can think of are like mental institution things. Am I wrong? That's
No, you're
scary.
correct. Just the most horrific things. And,
Yep.
I even read somewhere that at some point they were turning patients into caretakers. I guess you would kind of graduate. And so, you've got all of these just horrific things going on. I mean, just think a lobotomy in general is terrifying and in such dilapidated conditions, and then to not have experienced staff, and I can't imagine.
No, I can't either. So what you read is that the initial intention was good, right?
Absolutely,
Like
sure.
there's this need for care, like state care.
Mhm,
But this place didn't get used like that. It was sort of a catch-all for people who didn't fit the bill for what you wanted, I guess, or they had something curious going on that you thought, I can't deal with that. It's a mix when you read about it.
mhm,
It's
right.
creepy. I'm glad I live right now.
Yeah.
I live right this second.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't really know if all of the patients that were there truly needed to be there. And then, there were some that probably needed to be kept, I don't want to say confined because it sounds terrible, but not around so many other patients. I just think there was a whole lot of stuff going on inside the buildings, and we may not ever know about all of it.
Yeah. So did you hear about this? I know you grew up in Florida, but did you know about Milledgeville? Like growing up, had you ever heard of this?
Mm-mm. Nope.
Yeah, we never called it Central State. Like I never heard that until I was an adult. Excuse me. But it's just Milledgeville, and always had a negative spin. Like you're going to end up in Milledgeville. You're crazy. You're going to Milledgeville, and it was sort of like the negative notoriety of like Bellevue in New York,
Hmm.
which was founded
Yes.
in 1736. And, so that's another old creepy, maybe another episode. But yeah, it was like, oh, your Bellevue's crazy. Right. That was just the saying. A lot of
Yep.
bad stuff happened there too. And so
Mm.
we've got a whole list of some places we could talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it was always, and I don't know, maybe this was just a local thing from where I'm from, but people would say, "Oh, she's going to get sent to the fifth floor." Have you ever
Oh,
heard that?
the fifth
I was like,
floor.
"What? What is the fifth floor?" Um,
Oh.
yeah, I don't know. Maybe our local hospital in general, the fifth floor was more of a. I'm not sure. I don't know where that came from, but
Oh, yeah. So now that you said that, when I remember when I was younger, not a kid, but when I was younger, there was a regular hospital around here, and there was a specific floor. I don't remember what it was. Maybe it was the third floor. So it's
okay.
the same reference. Like it's a threat, or it's referencing, hey, this is how bad you are. You're gonna
Yes.
the fifth floor.
Well, Central State, they gained national recognition during the 60s as the world's largest mental institution. And they had 6,000 employees. And that is crazy. And it over like 8,000 acres of land, just tons and tons of buildings. Pilgrim Psychiatric in Brentwood, New York, which opened in the 30s, competed in size at one time. I think in 54, they had like almost 14,000 patients there. So it was kind of a competitor.
Yeah, and now that, everything's out there for us to learn about any single thing at any given moment,
Mhm.
I know of that one, but that's not one I heard of before. It was just Milledgeville and Bellevue were the ones. And then
Mhm.
some local stuff.
Right. Smaller local.
Yeah.
Sure. Excuse me. Well, many of the patients in the 40s were Civil War veterans. And I have a heart for veterans, so that just makes me a little sad. It was just the families couldn't care for them like they needed to. For a while, Black patients were placed in segregated buildings. And then in the 40s, they put them all together. And there was just this massive campus that truly looked like its own little small town, is the only way I know to
Yeah.
describe it. Yeah.
So the cemeteries were segregated because there's like the massive cemetery there.
Yeah.
And I understood that a lot of that was destroyed because some of the graves were unmarked.
Hmm.
Um, and that's so sad to me. It is
Mhm.
a sure sign of the times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, they had their own fire department. They had a police department, school, a church, power, water, steam plants, like, and Milledgeville was the capital before Atlanta.
Yeah. I
So
didn't know that until I went there.
Oh, okay.
I
Yeah.
had no idea.
I know you just think of, you know, Atlanta. That's it, right? That's all
Right,
there was.
right. Yeah. Had no idea. It
Yeah.
was just this, bustling town and now, I mean, you just would never know that. You just pull in and it's nothing. It's just very quiet, almost eerie. Um, there's a lot of people between, I mean, we've mentioned three hospitals
Hmm.
that really were dependent on those places, not just for housing, but for medical treatments and just help in general. These are folks that couldn't care for themselves. They weren't in a position to take care of themselves.
Yeah, it can really cause a debate when you think about, so there was the movement to deinstitutionalize mental hospitals, and that began
Mm.
all the way back in the 50s, but it was like a long process. And I just remember hearing it back, 20 years ago. Um,
Right.
but it's well, that's an episode in itself. It's actually really interesting. It sort of makes me think of back in the day when they said you can no longer have like freak shows at the fairs and circuses, and you think, well, yeah, sure, you don't want that. But if you've ever read some of those personal stories, um, some of these people were like, well, that's great, that you want to do this for us, and you think that all these things. What exactly work am I going to do?
Mhm.
What am I going to do? Some of these people were rich for the time
Right.
period. So I think you've got something similar to that here, where the intention seems good. That sounds right. Now, where are you going to put these people that are not just, the bad housewife? Because there were some of those stories,
Sure.
somebody who had, true physical illness to, mental illness, instability. It seems like quite a bit back in that time period, but when this was getting started and everything, people were there for all
Mhm.
sorts of things. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, there's a mixed feeling there, and I think that's a whole episode.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like taking a person, you're trying to get them out of the frying pan and you just dump them into the fire. there's
Yeah,
there's more problems to be solved, but so hyper focused on solving one problem that so many more are created, and then people are left on their own, and then you've got the rise of homelessness and other things. So yeah, absolutely, that's definitely an episode. That's episode worthy.
yeah, I think so too. It's pretty interesting. There's
Yeah,
some we could go at that from a local standpoint too, because we talked about visiting some local places, so
yeah. Yeah,
that would be good.
absolutely. Well, as these asylum buildings were vacated, some of the buildings were actually converted into prisons. I believe four of them, but don't quote me on that. I could be totally wrong. But
Yeah.
one of the prisons is now being used for forensic inpatient services.
Mhm.
It's like a 182 bed maximum security facility for those who have committed a crime, but they've not been found guilty because of mental health issues. um, yeah, and it's one of the few buildings still being used. Most of them are empty, and we're talking a couple hundred buildings. Um, but Mandy, you said you knew some people there. I want to talk about that for sure.
Yeah, so a couple of the people I knew were family members, but I did not know. I know of the situation, but I did not. That was before my time, or I was really small. One of those um, was my great grandmother, but I did
Mm,
not know her.
sure.
There's a lot of stories there of how she would act, what she would do, and then I guess it escalated to family, taking her there because
Mm,
they didn't know what else to do. I mean, people were not equipped. Now you can be like, oh, there's these symptoms, click, click, click.
yeah.
Oh, it looks like this. We can almost self diagnose at this point, although that can be dangerous. I would not
Right.
advise that. But yeah, back then, could you imagine, mama's acting crazy again? I mean, what do you do with that? So obviously you think, let's take them to the place that they need to be, cared for.
Mm-hmm.
So that would have went first to a local facility and then transported to, that was like the big house, right? That was the big house of crazy, which
Right.
now you think, gosh, maybe there was a pill, maybe there was therapy for that, maybe it was a hormonal imbalance.
Mm-hmm.
Because the information that I've been given, every time there was a pregnancy and delivery, there was this surge of instability. And,
Mm.
that's really sad. And I think
Mm-hmm.
how scary that probably was for her. Um, and the stories that are, in the family and all, they seem sad and lonely and like being put in that position where you've got to take somebody somewhere because you don't know what to do. And but when you're younger and you hear these things, you think, oh my gosh, how creepy, right? You think, oh, that's creepy, because you think crazy is like a horror movie. um there's a lot of terms for those things, nowadays. But anyways, she was there the last in the 70s. So I'm sure it was
Mm.
different, but I'm sure it was still packed, because that place, when you learn about just how many people were there and you look at the conditions, like we could do, I don't know, 5 parts on this. We really could. But excuse me. Anyway, I know of that, and then I know of a relative who's married into the family. I had mentioned on one of our previous episodes in a curious dish, I think it was, about that you can go to the courthouse and look through records, and there's so many records that are available until a certain time period. And there's actually the annals of like psychiatry, and you know, they they say this, they say lunacy. I've opened that big book. It's huge, thick, leather bound book of lunacy. And you go down through there and you're seeing handwritten pages of the
Oh,
people in your area back until a certain time period that were lunatics. That's, and so I found this other person in there, and I had heard a little bit about her. And bless her heart, it would say she is in, she is out, she's in, she is out, in, out. And I thought, golly, what a life, you know?
yeah. And we're talking long enough ago that we didn't really have the diagnosis that we have now. And who gets to say, oh, well, that person's definitely a lunatic. They need to go. Um, I think I read you needed a couple of signatures and that's it. And
You did.
there were there were some stories of husbands that were ready to move on. Um,
Yep.
and their wives all of a sudden were, needing to go to the loony bin. And it just took a couple of signatures to get them in there, and then you're trying to prove your way out, and I can't imagine in those circumstances trying to prove that you're the one that's okay. Um, just seems like a lot of chaos, a whole lot of chaos.
Yeah. Uh yeah, it's crazy. I'll tell you the last person that I knew of, and then I want to tell you about somebody's situation there. I had a good friend of mine, a dear friend who's passed now, but his dad was in and out of some places throughout the time that I knew him. But after my friend passed, and there was nobody really to take care of him, he was a very unpredictable, unstable person. And he ended up in jail, and then he ended up being taken down to Milledgeville because of you know just an array. That's a whole other thing. That could be his own episode. But anyway, he had a
Mhm.
lot of different things. So he was sent there. That would have been the last person that I knew of, and that was in the early 2000s. That when everything closed completely, then he was moved to a place I found out after the fact, that was for dementia. So, there was probably the onset of that with all the other, you know, mental disabilities and such. And so he lived out the rest of his life at this place for dementia. But, they
Mm.
really dispersed those, and people to different places, and some people didn't have anywhere to go. But he was someone who absolutely needed care, needed watching. He would go through times where he was seemed pretty good, but it was somebody who at least needed a family member watching, and without that, it was just not a good situation. But it would have been interesting had I been able to talk to him to see how that was different. Did they make some major changes? That they'll say all these things and you can read that, but when you talk to somebody personally, you know,
Yeah, if you go online and you just search it, you're going to get so many different stories. I mean,
sure.
I've heard some of the most horrific things from nurses that used to work there, and then
Yep.
other people will say, "No, it wasn't like that." You don't know.
Yeah, and it scares me. I guess when I talked about this kind of thing being really scary to me, it's because I also put myself in these people's shoes, and
Mhm.
I think it's scary to think of your power being taken away too, or
Mhm.
different times when maybe women didn't have rights, or you're dealing with somebody who's an epileptic. I have a close married in family member, and she's like, "Gosh, I would have been done for," back in the day. And I know one example that I was going to mention before was a patient who was there from, I think, like 1900 to 1931. Her husband institutionalized her. So he wanted a son, and she kept having babies that didn't make it. She
Mm.
uh, never had a son that lived. And so, boom, there she was. I mean, that's scary. That's scary. No
Yeah,
power.
yeah, to have that completely stripped from you, I cannot imagine. Cannot
No.
imagine.
Yeah, that's really,
Wow.
really creepy.
Yeah, so I'm gonna plug my book for a second.
Yeah.
I just published a book.
Yeah. I'm so
I'm so
excited.
excited. And it's called The Day After Yesterday. It's written under my pen name, which is Carly M. Donaldson. You know, but it talks, I mean, the opening scene, you've got a woman who's standing facing the wall, and she's peeling off wallpaper that's kind of yellowed and starting to come loose. And you just think, oh, she's a little bit of crazy.
Mhm.
Um, it is Alzheimer's disease, but at the beginning, you don't know that. How many patients were taken and put into a room with someone who was clinically insane? There was an actual thing there, and maybe even on a dangerous level, but they were just experiencing dementia or Alzheimer's or, like you said, um, just having a bad day. There are so many people walking around with mental health issues right now that they struggle with on a daily basis, but they maintain those on their own. There's medication and just to not have the opportunity to speak up and to be heard back in the day and just chunked somewhere in a room full of people and you don't know who's got what, that would be probably pretty terrifying.
Yeah, it is. I don't know how some people make it in life with the things that they go through, the traumatic experiences. And
Mhm.
yeah, there's so much information out there to read. And we always like to bring something personal instead of just regurgitating everybody else's. But gosh, there's a lot. You can lose some time
Yeah.
looking through even just the facts of this place. There's some pretty interesting personal stories, but the history in general is very interesting. Um,
Mhm.
just amazing architecture. Like, I love the
Oh.
look of all this. And I mean, you're talking about this is a place that went through the Civil War. I mean,
Mhm.
we're talking about you think the farther you go back and looking at the stories, the early stuff's really creepy because they didn't all these things that we're talking about, now we could do this or that. How could they have done all that? They didn't. They just didn't have that
Mhm.
capacity. But those stories are
Right.
are creepy. But then you've got the creepiness of later on, like 50s, 60s time period when it was, I don't know how it was in the 70s when the people I knew, some of those were there, but it was so packed. There's a whole other
Mhm.
creepy aspect. I think that they said like one person in the 60s was over like close to 13,000 patients. That's not realistic. It's like they were like they got extra bonus points the more people they got. It's how could you house
Yeah.
those people?
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, they just were consistently running out of caretakers. And, so they just started putting patients in those spots, and wow. It
Yeah.
had to have been a
When
madhouse.
I didn't know about that till you said that. Yeah, that's weird. And okay, in theory, maybe it's good because like you said, they get better and now they can help others. Was it like
Right.
that? I don't
Right.
know.
Yeah. We may never know.
Yeah. Yeah, we may never know.
Well, I visited. I went there. Um, and I'll go back. I will
Yeah.
absolutely go back. They accepted their last patient in 2010, and then they closed in 2012. Um, the hospital part did.
Right.
It is a massive place. If you think you're gonna just stop by on a road trip, um, you're gonna need at least a day, 2 days, probably just to get through it. It truly is its own town, so you're gonna need a day just to drive around and see all of the buildings and all of these little nooks in the streets and stuff. You would need a full day just never even stepping out of your car. There's just so much to see and so much to take in, and so I would definitely do a couple days. um, you're not supposed to enter the buildings, but you can see in the windows,
Okay.
which is interesting.
Oh, I was so jealous when I found out you were going. I was like, oh my gosh, this has been on my list forever. She beat me to it. And we've held off on talking about it. We kept saying, no, we're gonna have the podcast. We're gonna have the podcast. So we didn't even do that. I didn't get to quiz you about it yet. I'm about to
Yeah,
quiz you about it.
I
Because
love it. I love it.
I
Well,
okay, so do you like dilapidated buildings? Was that one of your first
yes,
draws?
I love them. I love empty buildings. I like to, let's look at all the history and hear the
Mhm.
stories. I love to to go into abandoned buildings. Um, I'll say with permission
Yeah.
or
That's called
ignorance.
ruin porn. Do you know that term? Ruin
No,
porn. It's like when
no,
you're
but I love
looking,
it.
you're flipping. Give me some more. How tore up is this place? Oh, this one's about to
Yes.
fall. Yeah. When you're like searching,
Yes.
that's called ruin porn.
I love that.
Now you
I
know.
love it. Who knew it had a title? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, this is a place. Not supposed to go in the buildings, but um I'll talk about a privately owned building that I
Okay.
did go into. Um it was once part of Central State, and then it was sold. It used to be one of the male prisons, and you can tell it looks. I mean, it's set up just like a prison. There's the outside areas, and all of the cells. You can see the offices and the mail room. It was purchased. It closed in 2008, I believe, is when they transferred out their last inmate. It was purchased by an entertainment company, and was used for filming. So,
That makes
well, and
sense. Yeah.
perfect
Right.
place. And I know this because I went there, and there were cars in the front that had gas lines piped into them, and I
Hmm.
was like, what what
What
is
is that?
that for? It was almost a little scary to walk by. But it was used for a movie where they caught a car on fire. So there were just these gas lines that went all the way out to storage buildings where I guess they would pipe it in there, light it on fire. Just super cool, entertaining,
Yeah.
stuff. But I was told that there was a scene from Walking Dead that was filmed there, and I'm a huge Walking Dead fan. And so I was like, I gotta go. I gotta go and I've got to
You
get some
are?
pictures.
How did I not know this?
I don't
Yeah.
know because that is nothing like anything I would ever watch.
I've never watched it, and it is totally
Really?
like something I would watch.
Yeah,
How do these things happen?
I don't know, but if you start watching it, I'll have to
Okay.
rewatch. We'll have to watch it together. It's yeah, really good. Really, there's a lot of spinoffs to it now and stuff that I don't follow through with, but the original Walking Dead, I was yeah, hooked from the minute I watched the first
Really?
episode. You won't be able to stop. Won't be able to
Okay.
stop.
Well, it's on my list. I don't know. Sometimes I miss it. These things. We're watching Sons of Anarchy now. I'm way behind.
Another good one. I like that too. Well, I went there because Walking Dead, and I thought, if I see something, I'll be able to correlate it to the scene of The Walking Dead that I
Yeah.
saw, and I could take pictures and be like, "I was there."
Yeah.
Um, I was not able to confirm that Walking Dead was actually filmed there, and I didn't see anything that looked familiar, but it was just amazing to see everything, that it was used for, and, some of the props that were still there. It was really, really cool. Burnt cars, just kinda nifty, and it kinda adds
Yeah.
to that creepy vibe when you're walking through. Um, yeah, but there was still, I mean, there was mail on the floor of the mailroom with the names of inmates. It was not the actual letters, it was they had taken pictures of the letters that had,
Mhm.
come in for these inmates. So you could see who wrote who, and just very
Wow.
interesting. Very cool.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, you don't take lightly, you're not making a lot of, but it's just super interesting and intriguing because we have that step back.
Yeah.
We're not in it, and you can like view the horrors and talk about the atrocities and all these weird things with just the place itself from a distance. It's very intriguing to touch the fire from back here. Say,
Yes.
let's look
Yeah,
at
absolutely.
this. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the when I was there on a Thursday. And I spoke to someone. I just found somebody that looked like she was in an official building, and I thought, well, I'm going to track her down because I couldn't find anyone to speak with about the buildings. And am I allowed to go inside of them? Are there any that are still functioning? Um, but she was actually working for. It was like a little museum that was more about when the town was the capital city, and so there was a lot of that stuff in there, but she said, we're opening a Central State Hospital museum. There was a photographer that came in and did a lot of photographs and was just so interested in it that she opened a museum. We were
That
opening
makes
it this
sense.
Saturday. It does.
Yeah,
It
because
does.
everybody's looking all this stuff up, to comprise all that and have that at a place, and they can use the tourism, right? Like the money
Yeah.
tourism in that town, and not just people sneaking and looking through the windows. Yeah, I was going to ask you, did you look when you see you went into a privately owned? I guess we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, there were a couple of places I may or may not have stepped into on
Okay.
accident, of course. Some
Okay.
accident.
If there's any pictures of these imaginary places, I would like to see those
I do have some pictures I can share.
at the place you didn't go. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
right.
I
Yeah,
mean,
but
people are
the
all
town,
over.
yeah, the town could definitely use the revenue, um, from a museum, and I obviously didn't get to go, it wasn't open yet, I was just a few days early. I know there's a gentleman that owns a home that, used to be used by nurses and doctors would be in and out of it. He now runs an Airbnb, but during the tour, as I'm kinda tooling around, I noticed that there were 4 buildings that were taped off,
Hmm.
and I thought, "Well, it's probably because they're unsafe, buildings, and they're just
Yeah.
trying." It's just some tape, So, who's it keeping out? So, I did a little research. Um, Mid-2023, Governor Kemp actually approved the demolition of those 4 buildings. It was kind of on the docket way before that, and, some think that it would be imperative to the regrowth of the town. So they want those buildings gone. Others argue that it's destroying history. So, there's the Georgia, I think it's the Georgia Trust for Historic Preservation, and then the Atlanta one. I think it's just the Atlanta Preservation Center. But those are two key players that are speaking up for the history that's behind, these buildings. And I mean, you see both sides. There's definitely, the governor's argument is they're unsafe buildings, they're holding back the town. Something could happen. There's some asbestos issues that were being taken care of, and it would cost a lot to renovate these massive, massive structures, these big buildings. Um, so the answer would be tear them down. But if you look at it, I hate to see that anyway. I hate to see
Yeah.
beautiful historic buildings just torn to the ground, but there's so much life and story in them.
Oh yeah, and now people have different opinions about that. Sometimes people,
Mhm.
the ugly parts of our history, they like to cut that out, and I get it. It's hard to think about, but we do learn from that, and these buildings, have been an amazing example of the time period and where we were with psychiatric help and mental
Yeah.
health and even physical health. There was a lot. Everybody knows about this place, and it's huge, and it's crumbling. A lot of it's already gone. A lot of well, did you guys go through the cemetery? Did you?
No, I didn't get to go and spend time at the cemetery. We did get to
Right,
see
you
where the
saw
cemetery.
that, right? Okay, that's thinking that's what you said. You saw it, and I understand it's pretty large.
Oh, yeah. Massive. It's
Yeah,
massive.
yeah. I mean, I didn't know if all of that you could see at a glance was cemetery, or there's so much that's when they said it was, really large. I didn't know if that's because a lot of it is unmarked graves. If it
Mhm.
looked large at a glance, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, there are, I'll say there are some stories that people were just taken before there was a cemetery, taken and buried on the properties. And so there are graves that we no one even knows where they are. So to tear those places down, who knows what happened there, what's there. It's just, I don't know. It's very sad. Very sad.
Yeah, well, it is sad. It's sad and creepy. And
Mhm.
there's we could go on and on with the creepy factors. I know one is there was a serial killer there. Do you know of this? There was a serial killer house there. It was a woman in like the 50s.
Yes.
Yeah, she killed like four relatives or something, poisoned these people. I guess they brought that down to schizophrenia, is what I understand. That's
Mhm.
I think that's what some of the people that I knew that were there, I think they were pegged with that term, and you don't
Mm.
know was that legit for the time
Right.
or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Who got to
So,
decide that?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I'll say there were two things that I found to be incredibly creepy during my visit there. Um, One is, just seeing the stale rooms that, these lobotomies took place in, very quiet. There's just not anything. You're not seeing anything. You're not hearing anything walking down these massive hallways, and you can look in these doors and through the glass and see things that just they make you feel uncomfortable. It's like, a visit to the doctor is already intimidating, but you know, take that and add 60 years of nothing to it. And it's just, there's a sense of just creepy. It's just creepy. But
Yeah.
the morgues, the drawers that were in the morgue, you can find a picture of those online. That's incredibly creepy. And it's because they're rusty and some are like half open and half closed. And, it just gives you this sense of, I don't like this at all, run. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there was, the cafeteria window. You can kinda walk up the stairs that are on the exterior of the building, so you can kinda go and peek in. There was a couple of cafeterias that we were able to see, and, it still it looks like a movie scene. It almost looks functional, but way outdated. There's carts and trays that you can see, but the one that got me the most, there were dead birds on the floor and on the tables, and
Mm.
I don't know if they got in there and couldn't get out. I don't know what happened, but just to see that was it's like a horror movie.
Oh yeah, I feel like it hits all the marks of like visual information, like all the things. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, which we obviously are. I think we got to do this museum. At least one of us needs to get to this museum, but that would be a great road trip.
I think that would be a fantastic road trip, and maybe we could do a little something live on scene. That would be so cool and so
That would be
fun.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll make a plan. And while we're making that plan and we're going and doing our visit, we would love to hear from you guys. Again, we might do a follow-up episode, and we would love to hear your stories. Maybe something you heard, maybe you had a family member that experienced Central State in some way, or just any other place that gives you those same vibes. Let us know. Drop us a line. Let us know what you know, tell us your stories, and maybe we'll share them on an upcoming episode. That'd be kind of cool. We
Yep.
hope to hear from you.